Voicemail came in at 2:14 in the afternoon while I was standing in a concrete stairwell at a job site in Phoenix, hard hat on, blueprints rolled under my arm, completely unreachable for the 40 minutes that apparently changed everything. My neighbor Sylvia's voice was shaking so badly I almost couldn't understand her. "Call me back right now. I don't care what you're doing. Something is wrong at your house. I can hear Aubrey screaming and I can't get anyone to answer the door." I listened to it twice, then I pulled up the home security app on my phone. I had installed cameras 18 months earlier, not because I suspected anything specific, more of a gut feeling that had started after my wife's brother moved in with us temporarily following his second DUI. Temporarily had stretched into 14 months. My gut feeling had quietly grown into something I didn't have a name for yet. The camera in the living room showed nothing. The one in the kitchen, nothing. I switched to the backyard camera and saw my brother-in-law Grady sitting on the porch steps with a beer, laughing at something on his phone like it was a regular Tuesday. Then I switched to the basement. My 9-year-old daughter was curled into the corner behind the water heater, her knees pulled to her chest, both hands covering her ears. The lights were off. What I could see in the grainy infrared feed made my stomach drop completely out of my body. She was rocking, the way she used to rock herself to sleep when she was a baby, when she had ear infections and nothing helped. She hadn't done that in years. I stood in that stairwell in Phoenix, Arizona, 340 miles from home, and watched my daughter rock herself in the dark for 11 seconds before I could breathe again. My wife, Gwen, was sitting on the top basement step. She wasn't doing anything. She was just sitting there, watching the door. I called Sylvia back before I'd even left the stairwell. "She's in the basement," I said. "Can you go around back? The gate latch is broken. It's just propped. Get Grady away from the back door, and I need you to get inside. The spare key is under the third planter on the left." Sylvia is 63 years old and a retired elementary school nurse. She said, "I'm already putting my shoes on." I was in my truck 11 minutes later, headed for the I-10 freeway, 5.5 hours in good traffic. It was 2:31 on a Tuesday afternoon, and traffic would be whatever it would be, and there was absolutely nothing I could do about that except drive. I called my younger brother Scott first. He lives 40 minutes from our house in Glendale. I didn't explain everything, just told him where the spare key was and that I needed him there before I could get there myself. Scott has never once asked me a clarifying question when I've used that particular tone of voice. He just said, "I'm getting my keys." The second call I made was to a man named Andre, who I served with for 3 years at Fort Bragg before we both got out and went separate directions. Andre is the kind of person you call when you need someone who stays calm, documents everything, and doesn't make things worse. I told him what I saw on the camera. He listened without interrupting. Then he said, "Send me the app login. I'll preserve the footage right now before anything gets deleted." I had footage going back 11 months. Hundreds of hours across 6 cameras. At the time I installed them, I told myself it was just general caution. Now, watching the mile markers tick past on the I-10, I understood I'd been building a case without letting myself admit that's what I was doing. Gwen and I had been falling apart for 2 years. It started, or at least I started noticing it, around the time her mother passed and left a life insurance payout that went directly to Gwen's side of the family, about $180,000 divided between Gwen and Grady. Gwen's whole personality shifted within 6 months. The house we'd bought together in Glendale, the one we'd repainted ourselves and planted the backyard garden in, suddenly wasn't enough. My salary as a structural engineer wasn't enough. Aubrey, who had come into our lives earlier than planned when Gwen was 26, had started being referred to in conversations with Gwen's family as a complication. I had tried to get Gwen into couples counseling 4 times. Each time she agreed, attended 1 session, and then found a reason to stop going. I kept making appointments anyway. I kept believing I was misreading things. Aubrey started having nightmares about 8 months earlier. She stopped wanting to have friends over. She stopped talking about school the way she used to. That unprompted stream of consciousness run down every kid does when they get in the car, listing everything that happened minute by minute. One morning I found bruises on her upper arm, 2 of them, the kind that come from fingers gripping. Gwen told me Aubrey had fallen off her bike. I wanted to believe her so badly that I did. I know what that sounds like now. Sylvia called me back at 3:47. Her voice was different, steadier, but the kind of steady that comes from a person actively holding themselves together. I have her, she said. I'm at my house with her right now. She's okay. She has some marks on her from where she was sitting on the concrete, but she's not hurt. She's drinking juice and she won't let go of my hand. I had to pull onto the shoulder for a minute after that call. What happened? I asked when I could. Gwen's brother locked her down there, Sylvia said, her voice dropping. I could hear her through my fence. When I came over the gate, I could see Gwen standing at the top of the basement stairs, just standing there. Grady had taken her tablet away because she was being mouthy, which from what Aubrey tells me means she asked why she had to stay inside on a sunny day. He told her she needed to think about her attitude. Then he put her in the basement and turned off the light. How long was she down there? At least 40 minutes before I heard her. I don't know how long before that. I asked about Gwen. Sylvia was quiet for a moment. She left when I came in, got in her car and drove away. Grady left right after you called Scott. Apparently, Scott is here now. The drive took 5 hours and 20 minutes. I know because I watched the GPS the entire time with a specific and almost surgical focus because it was the only thing I could look at without the edges of my vision going dark. Scott met me in the driveway. He looked at my face and just stepped out of the way. Aubrey was on Sylvia's couch under a fleece blanket, a sitcom playing on the TV that she wasn't watching. When she saw me, she didn't say anything. She just stood up and walked across the room and put her arms around my waist and held on. She's 9. She barely comes up to my chest. She held on for a long time. I kept calling for you, she said into my shirt. I knew you weren't home, but I kept calling anyway. There is no adequate response to that sentence. There is no word in any language that covers what I felt standing in my neighbor's living room holding my daughter and hearing that. I know, baby, I said. I know. I'm here now. Andre arrived 40 minutes after I did. He'd driven from Scottsdale and he brought a laptop and an external hard drive and a calm, methodical energy that I needed more than I knew. He shook my hand, squeezed Aubrey's shoulder, and sat down at Sylvia's kitchen table without being asked. 11 months of footage, he said. I've been going through it since you called me. You need to see some of this before we do anything else. I kissed the top of Aubrey's head and told her I'd be right back. She nodded and looked back at the TV with the particular expression of a child pretending to be fine. Andre had flagged 17 separate incidents across the 11 months of recordings. Not the basement, that was today's footage. 17 other incidents spread across nearly a year that I had missed or been given explanations for that I'd accepted. Grady grabbing Aubrey by the wrist and yanking her. Gwen taking her plate away from the table in the middle of dinner while she was still eating. Aubrey being made to stand in the corner of the kitchen for over an hour while Gwen and Grady watched TV in the next room. Audio of conversations I hadn't been present for. Names, instructions, a pattern that, when you saw all 17 instances laid out in chronological order, was unmistakably deliberate. The last audio file Andre played me was from 6 weeks earlier. I hadn't been home. Work trip to Denver. Gwen's voice. She needs to understand that when Grady is here, Grady's word goes, same as mine. Grady, she's going to tell her dad. Gwen, he's not going to believe a 9-year-old over his wife, and if she keeps it up, we put her somewhere she really doesn't want to be. She needs to learn that there are consequences for not cooperating. Grady, you sure you want to do this? She's your kid. Gwen, without a pause. She's inconvenient is what she is. I told you once Garrett finalizes the paperwork and I get my half of the estate settled the right way, none of this matters. I just need her compliant until then. I sat at Sylvia's kitchen table for a full minute without moving. Garrett is her attorney, I said. Andre nodded. I figured. I pulled her phone records from the joint account. She's been in contact with him almost weekly for 4 months. Also, 3 weeks ago, she asked you to update your life insurance beneficiary. She'd framed it as financial planning. We'd had a whole conversation about it. I hadn't updated it yet because I kept forgetting to call the insurance office, which was either luck or some unconscious piece of me that hadn't been willing to pull the thread. What are we looking at? I asked. I don't know the full scope yet, Andre said. But I know what you need to do tomorrow morning. I called 911 that night. The responding officers took a report, photographed the marks on Aubrey's arms where she'd been sitting on the concrete floor, and contacted CPS for an emergency response. Gwen came home at 10 p.m. and was met by 2 police officers in her own driveway. She was not arrested that night, but she was informed that a protective order was being sought and that she could not have unsupervised contact with Aubrey pending the investigation. She stood in the driveway and argued with the officers for 20 minutes about how this was a misunderstanding and I had orchestrated the whole thing. Grady was picked up at his friend's apartment in Tempe at 11:30 that night. Aubrey slept on a cot in Sylvia's spare bedroom. I slept on the couch. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I was at the Maricopa County Attorney's office by 8:45 with Andre's hard drive and a printed index of every flagged piece of footage. The intake attorney, a woman in her 40s named Carla, who had the specific quiet intensity of someone who has spent 20 years working child abuse cases, watched 40 minutes of footage in a room that got very still. This is not a single incident, she said when it was done. This is a documented course of conduct. That's a significantly different charging picture. She laid out the charges they were looking at: child abuse, unlawful imprisonment of a minor, conspiracy, and depending on what the financial investigation turned up, potentially more. What about the financial piece? I asked. Carla looked at me carefully. Tell me what you know. I told her about the inheritance, about Garrett the attorney, about the life insurance conversation, about the audio clip. She made notes without reacting visibly, but her jaw tightened at the insurance part. I'm going to refer this to our financial crimes unit and also to the FBI field office, she said. If there's any element of interstate planning involved, any digital communications across state lines, this becomes a federal matter as well. That changes the sentencing landscape considerably. She paused. I want you to understand something. The footage your friend preserved, the chain of custody on that evidence, it needs to be completely clean. Who handled it? Andre spent 8 years as a military intelligence analyst, I said. He knows how to preserve evidence properly. He documented every step. She nodded slowly. Good, because this is the kind of case that gets picked apart in court if the evidence isn't airtight, and I want this one to be airtight. I asked her what Gwen was looking at if all of it held up. She didn't hesitate. Child abuse charges alone, with the documentation you have, are felonies in Arizona. Multiple counts means multiple mandatory minimum sentences that run consecutively. Add the financial conspiracy element, add any finding related to your life insurance policy, and she's looking at a very long time. Her brother's prior record means he'll be treated as a repeat offender. He won't see the outside for years. I drove back to Sylvia's house and sat in her kitchen while Aubrey showed me a drawing she'd made that morning. Horses. She loves horses the way some kids love astronauts or soccer players, with a depth and specificity that feels like a calling. She'd drawn a whole scene, a barn, a paddock, a horse with a braided mane, and a small figure standing next to it with her hand raised, and she'd written at the bottom in her crooked 9-year-old handwriting, "Someday." I put that drawing on the refrigerator. The CPS investigation moved quickly given the evidence already in hand. Within a week, the family court had issued a temporary order granting me full physical custody and prohibiting both Gwen and Grady from any contact with Aubrey. The family attorney I retained, a man named Patrick Osei, who had been recommended by 3 different people independently, filed for emergency full custody the same day Gwen was formally charged. Gwen's attorney filed a motion claiming the footage had been obtained improperly. Andre's documentation was so thorough that the motion was denied within 48 hours. The judge noted, specifically and on the record, that the evidence had been handled with more care than most professional law enforcement would have applied. Grady was denied bail given his prior record and the severity of the charges. He sat in the Maricopa County Jail while his case worked its way through the system. The financial investigation took 3 months. What it turned up was worse than I had imagined, and I had been imagining fairly dark things by that point. Gwen had been systematically shifting money out of our joint accounts for 18 months into an account I didn't know existed, in preparation for a divorce settlement she'd been planning since around the time her mother's life insurance payout came through. She'd also been in communication with Garrett about restructuring the payout itself in a way that would minimize Aubrey's access to it. Her mother had intended a portion of the money to be set aside in the trust for Aubrey's college education. Gwen had been working to redirect it. The FBI found the emails, 18 months of them, correspondence between Gwen and Garrett, between Gwen and Grady, and, toward the end of the thread, between Gwen and a man in Las Vegas who offered, in language that was careful but not careful enough, to help make a long work trip go wrong for the right arrangement. A down payment had been sent via wire transfer 6 weeks before I drove home from Phoenix. I learned all of this from Carla, who called me at 7 in the morning on a Thursday and asked me to come into her office. She was very calm on the phone, the kind of calm that comes from having news that requires the other person to be sitting down. I sat across from her desk and she told me everything. I didn't say anything for a long time. She was going to kill me, I finally said. The evidence strongly suggests that was the plan, yes. Carla folded her hands. The man in Las Vegas has been arrested. He's cooperating. What Gwen is looking at now includes conspiracy to commit murder. In Arizona, that is a Class 2 felony, and it carries a mandatory sentence. Combined with the child abuse convictions, she will not be out of prison before Aubrey is an adult. Likely not before Aubrey has children of her own. I drove back to the temporary apartment I'd rented in Scottsdale, sat on the floor of the empty living room, and stared at the wall for about an hour. Then I got up and called Sylvia to check on Aubrey. The trial for the child abuse charges came first. I sat in the courtroom with Patrick beside me and watched the footage play for the jury. 11 months of what had happened inside my own house while I was away for work, while I was making dinner in another room, while I was asleep. 17 incidents, all documented, all time-stamped. The jury watched in silence. One woman in the back row pressed her hand over her mouth. A man in the front row stared at the ceiling for a long time after the basement footage played. Aubrey did not testify. Dr. Renata Shields, her trauma therapist, had assessed her and recommended against it. But Dr. Shields did testify, and what she told the jury was precise and difficult to hear. The psychological impact of ongoing abuse within the home, particularly abuse perpetrated by a primary caregiver, creates a specific kind of damage, she said. The child cannot rely on the person who is supposed to be the safest person in her world. Every instinct that should be building trust is instead building hypervigilance. The child I have been treating has symptoms consistent with complex trauma. This is not a single incident. This is the result of sustained, deliberate harm. Gwen's defense tried diminished capacity. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Grady had pleaded guilty 2 weeks earlier in exchange for a reduced sentence recommendation. 8 years served consecutively with an existing probation violation. He would be in his mid-40s when he got out. His record would follow him everywhere after that. Gwen's sentencing was 3 weeks after the verdict. The judge, a man named Bernard Cho, who had been on the family court bench for 16 years, read from a prepared statement that was the most controlled anger I have ever heard, delivered in measured sentences. "You are the person your daughter was supposed to trust above all others," he said. "You are the person whose face she was supposed to look for in a crowd. Instead, you made yourself the source of her fear, deliberately, systematically, over a sustained period, and you enlisted others to participate as though her suffering was something to be organized around your schedule." He paused. "This court does not have words sufficient to address what you did. It has only the tools the law provides. 15 years for the child abuse convictions. Charges for the financial fraud to be added consecutively, pending the conclusion of the federal case. The conspiracy to commit murder charge would be addressed in federal court." When the bailiff moved toward her, Gwen looked across the courtroom and found me. I don't know what she was looking for. I looked back at her without any warmth at all, and then I looked away. Outside the courthouse, Scott put his hand on my shoulder and didn't say anything. Sometimes that's exactly right. The federal case took another 7 months. The man from Las Vegas entered a full cooperation agreement and testified in detail. By the time it was over, Gwen had received an additional 12 years to run consecutively to the state sentence. With the murder conspiracy enhancement, she would be eligible for parole consideration when she was 61 years old. Garrett, the attorney, lost his license and faces federal charges for his role in the financial scheme. The money he helped redirect is in the process of being returned, including the portion that should have gone into Aubrey's education trust from the beginning. Aubrey is in therapy twice a week. She has nightmares less often now than she did in the beginning. She started a riding program at a stable in Chandler 8 months ago, and the woman who runs it, a patient and direct person named Lorraine, told me that Aubrey has a genuine instinct with horses. "She's calm with them," Lorraine said. "Some kids try to be in charge. She just tries to understand them. The horses notice." We moved into a new house in Gilbert 6 months ago. Single story, big backyard, a room with south-facing windows that Aubrey uses for art. No basement. She was very specific about that, and I would have agreed to any condition she set. On the day we signed the lease, Aubrey walked through every room carefully, like she was taking inventory. Then she stood in the backyard for a while looking at the yard, and I watched her from the sliding glass door. Eventually, she came back inside and said, "Can we get a dog?" We have a dog now. His name is Biscuit, and he sleeps at the foot of Aubrey's bed, and she has not once complained about the nightmares he causes by taking up most of the mattress. At the 6-month mark after we moved in, I got the final email from Patrick O.C. confirming that Gwen's parental rights had been formally terminated by the family court. He attached the court order as a PDF. I saved it to a folder, and then I went into the backyard, where Aubrey was playing with the dog, and I just watched them for a while, without saying anything. She looked up at some point and caught me watching. "You okay, Dad?" "Yeah," I said. "I'm good." She studied me for a second with that particular assessment children do, deciding whether the adult answer matches the adult face, and then she seemed to decide it did, and she went back to throwing a tennis ball for Biscuit. Sylvia comes over for dinner on Thursday evenings now. She and Aubrey have a long-running argument about the proper ratio of cheese to noodles in macaroni and cheese that neither of them intends to resolve. Scott comes by most weekends. Andre and his family came down from Scottsdale for Aubrey's 10th birthday, and Aubrey presented him with a crayon drawing of what she informed him was a spy doing spy stuff, which he has presumably framed. Here is what I would tell anyone watching who recognizes something in this story. Install the cameras, keep records. Write down dates and what you observed and how your child behaved afterward. If something feels wrong, you are probably not imagining it, and the documentation you create when your instincts are telling you something is off is the documentation that will matter later. In Arizona, child abuse can be reported to the Department of Child Safety at 1-888-SO-6-SHIELD, which is 1-888-0-667-2445. If you're in another state, your local DCS or CPS handles these reports, and a call costs nothing. The people who hurt children depend on silence and on adults doubting themselves. Your instincts exist for a reason. The hardest thing I have ever done was drive 5.5 hours knowing what I was driving toward and not being able to get there faster. The best thing I have ever done is be the father who installed the cameras and kept the records and got there when it mattered, even if it wasn't as fast as I needed to be. Aubrey is doing the thing kids do when they're healing from something they shouldn't have had to survive. She is building a new normal out of small, safe things. Thursday dinners and riding lessons and a dog named Biscuit and a room full of paintings and windows that let in the light. She is building it deliberately, one piece at a time, and she is doing it with a steadiness that I find remarkable in a 10-year-old and that I have stopped being surprised by because she is exactly herself, and exactly herself turns out to be more than enough. I keep coming back to the cameras. Not as a symbol of anything, just the plain fact of them. I installed 6 cameras in my own house because something in my gut told me to, and at the time I couldn't have explained it to anyone without sounding paranoid. I almost talked myself out of it twice. The second time I almost didn't go through with it. I was standing in the hardware store holding the packaging and I thought, if I'm wrong, I've wasted $200. If I'm right, I'll know. That was the whole calculation. $200 and the willingness to trust what I was feeling even when I couldn't prove it yet. That's not a small thing. I've thought about it a lot since everything happened. The willingness to act on what you know before you can explain it to someone else. That takes a kind of honesty with yourself that most people avoid because it's uncomfortable. Admitting something is wrong means you have to do something about it. It's easier to accept the explanation you're given and keep the peace. I accepted too many explanations for too long. The bruise on Aubrey's arm. The way she stopped talking in the car. The nightmares that started without a clear cause. Every time I chose the easier story, I was choosing my own comfort over her safety, and I have to sit with that. I do sit with it. There's no version of this where I get to feel completely clean about the 18 months before I installed those cameras. What I've learned, what this whole thing drilled into me in a way I don't think will ever fully leave, is that doing right by someone requires more than good intentions. It requires paying attention even when paying attention is inconvenient. It requires following through on what you observe rather than waiting for certainty you may never get. Gwen had good intentions once, or at least she had the ability to perform them convincingly. What she lacked was the discipline to keep choosing someone else's well-being over her own wants. That's a choice you make every day, not once. Every day you either build something or you quietly dismantle it. She dismantled it methodically for 2 years while I was trying not to see. Aubrey is the most clear-eyed person I know. She is 10 years old and she has been through something that would flatten most adults, and she is still standing, still painting, still arguing with Sylvia about cheese ratios on Thursday nights. That didn't come from nowhere. Some of it is just who she is, a stubbornness that I recognize because it's mine too. But some of it came from going through something terrible and discovering she survived it. There is a particular kind of confidence that only gets built that way. You can't give it to someone. You can only stand close enough while they find it themselves. I think about what it means to actually protect someone. Not the version that looks like protection, controlling, restricting, making decisions for them, but the real version. The real version is showing up. It's paying attention. It's trusting your instincts enough to act before you have a courtroom's worth of proof. It's making 2 phone calls from a parking lot in Phoenix and driving 5.5 hours with your hands steady on the wheel. Because your daughter needs you to hold it together long enough to get there. I got there, not as fast as I needed to be, but I got there and I kept getting there every day after in every way that counted. That's the only thing I know for certain about any of this. You don't get to choose whether hard things happen. You only get to choose what you do when they do. I chose badly for a while, and then I chose better, And the difference between those two choices is the entire story of my daughter's life right now. A house with big windows and a dog named Biscuit, and a stable down the road where a woman named Lorraine says she has good instincts. That's enough. That's more than enough.